Good evening. I'm glad you're here. Before we begin, if you enjoy quiet stories like this one, the kind that lets history whisper instead of shout, you might want to subscribe. It helps this small corner of the internet stay alive, and it tells me you'd like to hear more. And when this story ends, tell me in the comments what you felt, not what you think, but what you felt. Because tonight's story isn't about numbers, or dates, or medals. It's about one man, and the quiet, practical kindness that changed the course of hundreds of lives. The year is 1938. Europe is uneasy, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. The newspapers are full of speeches and promises, borders are shifting, and in the heart of the continent, a small country, Czechoslovakia, stands trembling on the edge of disaster. Prague is cold that winter. Snow sticks to the roofs. The trams grind through the slush. At the main station, mothers hold their children a little tighter. No one knows what tomorrow will bring. Rumors move faster than trains, of German troops, of camps, of neighbors disappearing. And then, into this uneasy city, comes an Englishman. He's not a diplomat, not a spy. He's just a young stockbroker from London. His name Nicholas Winton. He's 30 years old, and he has come for a skiing holiday. A holiday that he never takes, because instead of snow, he finds something else, fear. Children sleeping on straw, parents with nowhere to go, faces pressed to train windows, waiting for permission that will never come. And something inside him, perhaps a quiet outrage, perhaps an old-fashioned sense of duty, refuses to look away. He doesn't make speeches. He doesn't call the press. He just stays and starts writing names. That's where it begins, not with glory, not with battle, just with a man, a notebook, and the feeling that doing nothing would be far worse. And from this cold city, from this cluttered desk in a borrowed hotel room, Nicholas Winton would begin one of the most extraordinary rescues of the 20th century. The winter of 1938 settled upon Europe like a damp, heavy blanket. The air felt uneasy, as if the entire continent had forgotten how to breathe. Newspapers spoke in clipped, nervous tones. Headlines were shorter now, sharper. Words like annexation, treaty, ultimatum appeared almost daily, and no one quite understood what they meant, only that they carried a taste of iron and dread. Radios murmured in kitchens, their voices cracked with static. People listened even when they didn't want to. It was impossible not to. Something was happening, and everyone could feel it. In the way strangers avoided eye contact on trams, in the way conversations fell silent when someone mentioned Germany. In Czechoslovakia, that feeling was stronger than anywhere else. The country sat like a frightened animal, cornered by wolves. To the west lay Germany, bold and loud under its banners. To the north, Poland eyed its borders with unease. To the south, Hungary stirred, restless and opportunistic. And in Prague, the golden city of bridges and spires, fear crept into even the cobblestones. The streets looked the same as they always had. The Vltava still ran slow and cold beneath its bridges. The church bells still tolled the hour. But the rhythm of life had shifted. The markets were quieter. The laughter from cafes came out to fast, to forced, like someone trying to remember how to breathe naturally. The air smelled of coal smoke and boiled cabbage, mixed with the sour tang of whirring. Refugees from Austria and Germany poured into the city, men in threadbare coats, women clutching sleeping children, carrying suitcases filled not with clothes, but with family photographs and scraps of paper that proved they had once belonged somewhere. At the main railway station, the noise was relentless. Trains hissed and coughed like sick animals. Announcements echoed from loudspeakers, distant and indifferent. Soldiers marched through the platforms with the dull rhythm of inevitability. And among it all, the children waited, quiet, confused, eyes too large for their faces. They played with buttons on their coats or counted tiles on the floor, pretending not to see their mothers crying. The newspapers called it displacement, the people called it fear. And yet, life went on in small ways. A baker still set out his bread before dawn, the crusts crisp and warm against the morning frost. Students still hurried through the streets, books pressed against their chests, as though they could shield them from the world. A violinist still played under the arches of Charles Bridge, his notes thin and trembling in the cold air. Even as the world seemed to tilt toward madness, humanity clung stubbornly to its routines, as if pretending long enough might make it true. In London, far away from the fear and the smoke, people read about it over breakfast. They turned the pages, frowned, and shook their heads. Terrible business, they said, and then they went back to their eggs and toast. Europe's unravelling was a story happening elsewhere, to other people. The British papers were full of reassurances, Mr. Chamberlain's umbrella, peace in our time, diplomacy. Such comforting words, but in Prague, peace had the hollow sound of footsteps at night. It was into this tense, trembling world that a young man from England arrived, Nicholas Winton. He was not a journalist, not a politician, not anyone of importance. He worked as a stockbroker, a man of numbers and balance sheets, of predictable routines and orderly lives. He was, in other words, the last kind of person you'd expect to find at the heart of a humanitarian rescue. He had planned to go skiing. A holiday in the Alps, fresh snow, clear skies, clean air, that was the plan. But a friend, a man named Martin Blake, sent him a telegram from Prague. "Cancel your trip," it said. "Come here instead." "I need help." Winton hesitated, as any reasonable person would. He had never been to Czechoslovakia. He didn't speak the language. What could he possibly do? And yet, something made him go, perhaps curiosity, perhaps conscience. When his train pulled into Prague station, the city was cloaked in fog and the sour smell of coal. The platforms were crowded with faces that all seemed to ask the same silent question: will anyone help us? Winton walked among them, clutching his small suitcase, feeling absurdly out of place in his tailored English coat and polished shoes. Around him, soldiers barked orders, families huddled close. Children shivered under thin blankets. He would later say he didn't think, he simply acted. But in that first moment, as he stepped into the chaos of the station, something inside him shifted. He was 30 years old, methodical, skeptical, sensible, and yet he could not walk away. That evening, as the tram squealed through the wet streets and the city's lights flickered against the mist, he met with Blake and several others, aid workers, volunteers, idealists. They spoke in low voices around a cluttered table. Teacups rattled as trains passed outside. Someone mentioned that no one was helping the children, not the British government, not the Americans, no one. The room fell quiet. Then Winton, this tidy, polite man from London, said simply, "Then we must." It sounded absurd. He had no authority, no resources, no plan. But sometimes history turns on moments that seem far too small to matter. A man says we must, and somehow the world begins to shift. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and indifferent. It covered the rooftops, the empty streets, the crowded platforms where families waited for miracles that never came. Somewhere in the city, a clock struck 9. In that sound, cold, precise, eternal, lay all the waiting, all the fear, and the faintest trace of hope. Nicholas Winton would not sleep that night. Not well, at least. The faces of the children had followed him back to his hotel, their eyes full of a question he could not answer. He poured himself a glass of water, sat down at the small wooden desk, and stared at the blank paper before him. Then he picked up his pen, the ink spread slowly across the page. A name, then another, and another. The list had begun. Morning came grey and indifferent. The light over Prague was the kind that flattens everything, the river, the roofs, the faces. It gave no warmth, only shape. From the window of his modest hotel room, Nicholas Winton could see smoke rising from the chimneys across the street. mixing with the mist that clung to the city like breath on a cold mirror. Somewhere a tram bell clanged, distant and hollow. Somewhere else, a church bell tried to sound hopeful. Neither quite succeeded. He dressed carefully, as if order could protect him from the chaos outside. Shirt, tie, waistcoat, jacket. It was a habit from London life, numbers and neatness, routines that made sense. But as he stepped into the street, the city made nonsense of all of it. The pavements were crowded with people who had nowhere to go. Families who had fled from Sudetenland after the Munich Agreement. That paper promise of peace signed by men who would never stand in bread lines. Peace in our time, they had said. But for thousands of Jews and political refugees, peace now meant exile, fear, and waiting for a train that might never come. Winton walked among them, quiet, observant. The air smelled of wet wool and wood smoke. Somewhere a child coughed. Somewhere else, someone prayed. The language was foreign, but suffering is fluent in every tongue. He followed his friend, Martin Blake, through narrow alleys until they reached a building that had once been a school, now turned into a camp. Inside, the sound hit him first, the restless murmur of too many people in too small a space. Then the smell, straw, sweat, despair. The classrooms were packed with families sleeping on the floor. Mothers tried to hush their babies. Old men stared into nothing. Children sat against the walls, their faces pale and solemn, their eyes enormous. It was not the kind of misery that screamed. It was the quiet kind, the kind that waits. Blake explained the situation in hurried English. The Nazis had already taken Austria. Czechoslovakia was next. The British and French governments, eager to avoid another war, had agreed to let Hitler have the borderlands in exchange for his promise to stop there. He would not. Everyone knew it. But what could anyone do? The borders were closing, and the people who might have escaped had nowhere left to run. The aid workers, mostly locals, Quakers, and a few foreigners like Winton, did what they could. They distributed soup, blankets, medicine, but what they really needed were visas, papers, the right stamps on the right forms. Bureaucracy, the coldest word in any language, now stood between life and death. Winton watched as a mother tried to fill out a form she couldn't read. Her hands shook, her child tugged at her sleeve, hungry. The father had been taken, she said, somewhere near Brno. No one knew where. He's probably in a camp now. Someone whispered. The word camp had not yet become what it would soon mean. It was just a place, distant, mysterious. But the fear in her voice made the meaning clear enough. That evening, Winton returned to his hotel room and wrote in his notebook. His handwriting was small, precise, the same as he used for financial ledgers, but instead of numbers, he now recorded names. We could take the children, he wrote, if Britain allows it. He had no official support, no authority, and barely any money. But the idea had taken root, stubborn as a weed between stones. If the governments of Europe would not act quickly enough, perhaps ordinary people could. If he could find families willing to take in refugee children, perhaps the British government would let them in, perhaps. He began to write letters. First to friends, then to charities, then to anyone who might listen. He explained, as calmly as possible, that hundreds of Jewish children would soon be trapped in Czechoslovakia. He asked for help, money, homes, signatures. Most replies were polite, but vague. A few were indignant. Britain had already taken in too many refugees, they said. There were rules, procedures, quotas. Still, he wrote. The following days blurred together. The city seemed caught in a perpetual dusk. He met with local Jewish leaders, embassy officials, anyone who might have connections. He carried his notebook everywhere, its pages filling quickly with names, addresses, ages. He listed brothers and sisters together, refusing to separate them unless absolutely necessary. Some parents begged him to take even one child. Just one, they said, pressing photographs into his hands. At least one of us must live. He promised nothing. He wrote everything down. There was no triumph in his work, only exhaustion and the dull ache of urgency. Each evening, when he returned to his room, the city felt heavier. The sky hung low. The trams sounded like sighs. But he kept going, because what else was there to do? One night, as he left a meeting, he passed the railway station again. It was late. Snow fell in small, silent flakes. Through the windows he saw a group of children sitting on their suitcases, half asleep, waiting for a train that would not come. Their mothers stood nearby, whispering prayers into the cold. The lamps flickered, the snow melted on the glass and ran down like tears. He watched them for a long time. Then he turned away and walked back to the hotel. In his notebook, he added one more line beneath the lists of names. We must find a way. Outside, the snow kept falling, slow, steady, indifferent, covering the tracks, the roofs, the world. The sound of it was so soft that even the city seemed to hold its breath. The days began to blend, one into another. In the pale light of each morning, Nicholas Winton would leave his hotel and step into the anxious rhythm of Prague. The trams rattled by, their bells echoing through narrow streets that smelled of wet coal and fear. The markets were quieter now. The bread was smaller, the smiles thinner. Yet, somehow, life still pretended to continue. Bakers baked, tailors stitched, teachers tried to teach. But beneath it all lay the same quiet question: how long until everything falls apart? At his improvised office, a small desk in the Hotel Europa, Winton sat surrounded by papers. Piles upon piles of them, names, photographs, letters from desperate parents, forms stamped, unstamped, half-stamped. Each one represented a life hanging by a thread of bureaucracy. He learned the language of officials: transit permit, entry visa, guarantor required. Cold phrases that decided who would live and who would be left behind. He was not alone anymore. Volunteers had gathered around him, Czechs, Britons, students, a handful of Quakers. They came not for glory, but because there was simply too much to do. The hotel's front hall became a sea of paper and voices. Typewriters clacked, teacups called on window ledges. Somewhere, a child cried softly while his mother filled in yet another form. The British government, cautious and slow, had agreed to let children under 17 enter, provided each had a foster family waiting and a deposit of £50 for their eventual return. £50, a fortune for refugees. Winton frowned when he read it. The rule was meant to reassure officials, but it was also a wall, a tall, cruel wall made of good intentions and red ink. He would have to climb it, somehow. In London, his mother, Barbara Winton, joined the fight. She was as persistent as her son was calm. She wrote letters, knocked on doors, sat in waiting rooms. She argued with clerks, cornered officials, persuaded vicars and schoolteachers to sponsor the children. The Winton household became an unofficial rescue office. Their dining table disappeared under stacks of forms and photographs. Nicholas wrote every night to coordinate the chaos, his handwriting shrinking smaller as the lists grew longer. He kept meticulous records: the names of children, their ages, their parents' addresses, the names of British families willing to take them in. Each train required days of preparation, travel permits, border documents, medical checks. Everything had to be perfect, because a single missing stamp could stop the whole operation. It was not heroism that kept him going, but precision. He fought the rising tide of cruelty with pen strokes and carbon paper. Outside the hotel, the mood in Prague darkened. German troops were already massing near the border. Refugees whispered of arrests. Children practiced walking in silence, because trains sometimes punish noise. The adults didn't sleep much. Every sound, a car door, a knock, a shout, made hearts jump. People began to pack their lives into suitcases that could be carried in one hand. Winton felt the weight of their trust. He was a guest in a country that was vanishing day by day. At night, he would lay awake, listening to the murmur of the city, the creak of pipes, the far-off rumble of trains. He wondered how many more names he could add to his list before time ran out. One evening, a mother came to see him with 2 children, a girl of 6 and a boy of 8. She wore a threadbare coat, her face pale from exhaustion. She spoke little English, but enough to say what mattered. She took his hand and pressed a small envelope into it, photographs, birth certificates, ration cards. Her eyes asked what her words could not. Will they be safe? Winton hesitated. He had said yes to many times already. But he looked at the children, their faces solemn, waiting. He nodded. She thanked him, kissed both her children on the head, and left without looking back. After she was gone, Winton sat for a long time staring at the photographs. 2 small faces, caught in the flash of a camera, smiling because someone had told them to. He turned the photo over. On the back, written in neat Czech handwriting, were their names and a single line: "Please take care of them." He placed it carefully into his folder and wrote 2 more numbers on his list. There were nights when he doubted himself, when the mountain of paper seemed ridiculous compared to the scale of what was coming. He was, after all, just one man, with a borrowed desk, a few friends, and a typewriter that jammed every other hour. But he also knew that even one saved child would be enough to make it worthwhile. If something is not impossible, he once said, then there must be a way to do it, and so he did it, quietly, methodically, stubbornly. By February 1939, the first train was ready. 20 children, all under 12. He checked every document twice. He read their names aloud, as if memorizing them. The morning they left, he went to the station to see them off. It was cold. The platform smelled of soot and snow. Parents stood in clusters, trying not to cry. The children waved paper flags made from scraps of newspapers. When the whistle blew, the crowd exhaled as one. The train began to move, wheels grinding against the rails, smoke curling into the grey sky. Winton stood on the platform until it was gone from sight. Then he returned to his desk. There were more names to add. Back at the hotel, he picked up his pen again. The ink was running low, but his list was far from finished. He opened the window for a breath of air, and the sound of the city drifted in, the church bells, the trams, the muffled hum of a world teetering between peace and catastrophe. He dipped his pen and wrote another name, his handwriting steady and small. A clerk once told him the war would start before his trains could save anyone. Winton had smiled politely and replied, "Then we must hurry." He did not raise his voice. He did not preach. He simply wrote faster. The first train left Prague on a morning that smelled of iron, steam, and fear. It was March 1939. Winter still clung stubbornly to the streets, and frost bloomed on the station windows. The sky was the color of ash, and everything about that day felt temporary: the air, the promises, even hope itself. On the platform, hundreds of people stood in anxious clusters, their breath rising like smoke. Mothers buttoned coats too small for their children. Fathers knelt to tie loose laces, their hands shaking not from the cold, but from something else, that awful, helpless kind of love that knows it's running out of time. Children clutched small suitcases, or stuffed animals gone soft with wear. Some smiled, because they were told to be brave. Others stared straight ahead, their faces pale and still. Nicholas Winton moved quietly among them, checking names against lists, handing out final papers, smoothing details that no one else seemed to see. He was calm, precise, polite, as if he were managing a business deal rather than a miracle. His hat was dusted with snow. His gloved hands carried a clipboard filled with names that no one dared forget. The train's engine hissed impatiently. A soldier shouted something in German. The air seemed to tighten. Someone began to cry, quietly at first, then louder, until it spread through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. Mothers hugged their children again and again, as if memorizing the shape of them. Some pressed envelopes into small hands, family photos, blessings, tiny scraps of home. Winton did not interfere. He simply watched, his jaw set. He understood that there are moments when words only make things worse. Then, at last, the whistle blew. The sound was sharp enough to cut the heart in two. The train began to move, slow and heavy. Tiny faces appeared at the windows, pressed against the glass, waving. On the platform, arms reached up, waving back, holding on to nothing. Someone ran alongside the train until they stumbled. Someone else collapsed to their knees. And then, as the smoke swallowed everything, the train was gone. Winton stayed on the platform. Everyone else had left. The steam drifted around him. Ghosts. He took off his hat, rubbed his eyes, and whispered something no one heard. Then he turned, walked back through the silent station, and returned to his desk. That first train carried 20 children. It reached London 2 days later. They arrived tired, hungry, but alive. Volunteers met them at Liverpool Street Station. The children blinked under the grey English sky, clutching paper tags that bore their names and numbers. British families waited with nervous smiles. There were hugs, confusion, tears, and tea, always tea. In Prague, Winton received the telegram confirming their arrival. He allowed himself one deep breath, then picked up his pen and began arranging the next transport. There was no time for celebration. The borders were tightening. German troops were moving faster than the trains. By April, there were 2 more trains, then 3, then 4, each one harder to organize than the last. Each one heavier with names and goodbyes. The paperwork grew mountainous. Some nights, Winton worked until dawn, his handwriting shrinking into fine lines that even he could barely read. He slept in his chair. His meals were tea and bread. Yet, somehow, he managed to keep the system moving. Each child matched with a family. Each journey mapped, like a fragile thread, across a continent coming undone. His persistence baffled the officials. "You cannot save them all," one clerk said sharply. Winton nodded. "Then we'll start with as many as we can." He learned how to speak their language, not Czech or German, but the dialect of bureaucracy. He spoke in stamps, seals, and signatures. He learned when to flatter, when to bribe, when to quietly bend the rules. He became fluent in the art of not asking permission. By summer, the trains were leaving regularly. 7, in total, reached safety before the borders closed. 669 children in all. Some so young they could not spell their own names, some old enough to understand that they might never see their parents again. Each departure was the same sound of metal and tears, the same smell of coal and wet wool, the same promises, "We'll write soon. You'll be safe," the same lies, told out of love. And yet, with every whistle, with every roll of the wheels, Winton's impossible idea became real. He was not a saint. He never thought of himself as one. He simply believed that when faced with suffering, one must do something, however small, however absurd. Then came September. The 9th train was ready. 250 children were listed, their suitcases packed, their permits approved. But on September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Europe caught fire overnight. All trains were stopped. The border slammed shut. Winton spent the day pacing his room, telegrams scattered across his desk. He tried every contact, every route, every hope. It was useless. The train never left Prague. The names on that final list, all of them, disappeared into the smoke of history. He never spoke of it, not once. When asked years later how he felt that day, he only said, "I tried to do what I could. The rest was not in my hands." Outside his window that night, the city went dark. The bells stopped ringing, the trams went silent, and in the distance, the rumble of tanks replaced the sound of trains. Nicholas Winton sat alone at his desk, surrounded by papers, ink, and silence. He looked down at the lists one last time, then closed the notebook carefully, as if tucking away the world. 669 children had escaped, hundreds more had not. He leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed, and for the first time in months, he let himself rest. Outside, the rain began to fall, gentle, steady, endless, washing the dust from the empty tracks. Nicholas Winton returned to London in early 1939. He brought with him lists of children, identity photographs, and official letters collected in Prague. His immediate objective was to persuade the British government to accept as many refugee children as possible from Czechoslovakia before the Nazi occupation reached them. He lived with his parents at 5 Hampstead Heath Drive in North London. The family home quickly became the centre of operations. The dining room was converted into an office, the table filled with typewriters, piles of telegrams, and forms stamped by foreign ministries. His mother, Barbara Winton, became his most active assistant. She organised correspondence, managed donations, and visited offices in person when her son was at work. The process of rescue was bureaucratic and slow. Every child required several documents: a Czech exit permit, a German transit visa, a Dutch transit visa for the ferry route from the Hook of Holland, and a British entry permit. The British Home Office demanded proof that each child had a foster family and the financial guarantee of £50. This rule was absolute. The Wintons had to find British families willing to sign legal documents accepting responsibility for a child they had never met. Nicholas Winton designed a simple system. He made index cards for each child with their photograph, age, religion, parents' names, and country of origin. Each index card corresponded to a British family file. His handwriting was meticulous. Each train was organised like a business project: scheduled dates, lists of passengers, financial records, and correspondence with the Prague Committee. In early March 1939, Winton submitted the first transport list to the Home Office. The application covered 20 children. He received approval on March 14th. The next day, March 15th, German troops entered Prague. Czechoslovakia ceased to exist. Despite this, the British government honoured the permits that had already been issued. On March 14th, the first group of children arrived at Liverpool Street Station in London. They were met by volunteers from the Refugee Children's Movement. The children wore tags with their names and carried small bags containing clothes, sandwiches, and photographs of their parents. Some were taken to relatives already in Britain. Most went to host families, arranged by Barbara Winton and her network of sponsors. After the first success, Winton expanded the operation. He coordinated directly with Trevor Chadwick, a teacher from Dorset, who remained in Prague to supervise departures. Winton handled the London side: sponsors, permits, and correspondence with the Home Office. Chadwick organised trains, bribed officials when necessary, and escorted the children to the border. They exchanged telegrams almost daily. By May, 3 transports had reached England. The number of rescued children rose to more than 200. Each transport required extensive coordination between 3 governments. Nicholas Winton's files show detailed lists of every passenger, their birth date, and the signed British Guardian. The pace accelerated through summer 1939. The 6th transport departed in July, the 7th and 8th in August. The 9th was scheduled for September 1st. 250 children had received travel permits and tickets. The documents were complete. But on that morning, Germany invaded Poland. All trains were stopped. The German authorities cancelled the departure. Those 250 children had reached safety. By then, 8 transports had been completed. The total number of children rescued through the Winton organisation was 669. Most were Jewish, though some were political refugees or from mixed families threatened by Nazi laws. The youngest was 2 years old. The oldest was 17. After the 9th train was cancelled, the rescue operation ended immediately. War closed all routes from continental Europe to Britain. The files were packed away. The typewriters were stored. The Wintons continued to receive letters from Prague for several weeks, desperate requests for help that could no longer be answered. By October 1939, all communication with Czechoslovakia had stopped. Nicholas Winton returned to his ordinary work as a stockbroker. He had achieved in 6 months what entire governments had failed to attempt: the organized evacuation and placement of hundreds of children through private initiative and persistence. He did not issue a report or seek publicity. He filed the lists, the receipts, and the correspondence in folders and placed them in a small box in his study. His mother continued to maintain contact with the foster families, sending occasional notes to check on the children's welfare. The rescue of the 669 Czechoslovak children was complete. It was conducted entirely through civilian effort, without official funding, and concluded just 2 days before the outbreak of the Second World War. After the outbreak of the Second World War, in September 1939, Nicholas Winton's humanitarian operation came to a full stop. The borders of continental Europe were closed, and civilian travel was strictly restricted. The office in Hampstead was dismantled. The remaining paperwork, train schedules, correspondence with Prague, sponsorship guarantees, and photographs was placed into organized folders and stored at his family home. Winton volunteered for active service. In 1940, he joined the Royal Air Force. He served in the administrative and training branch, where his work focused on records, logistics, and personnel organization. He was commissioned as a pilot officer on June 22, 1940, promoted to flying officer in 1941, and later reached the rank of flight lieutenant. His duties were based primarily in Great Britain. There is no record of overseas combat assignments. He was known among his colleagues as calm, precise, and methodical. Few of them knew anything about his earlier rescue work in Prague. The subject did not arise in conversation. His wartime friends remembered him as practical, reserved, and professional, a man who preferred efficiency to emotion. While he served in the RAF, the children he had rescued adapted to life in wartime Britain. Many were evacuated from London and other major cities during the Blitz. They were housed in rural villages, schools, and foster homes across the country. Letters from the children to their biological parents in occupied Europe stopped by 1940. After the war, historical records confirmed that the vast majority of their parents had been deported to concentration camps such as Auschwitz and Treblinka, where they were murdered. Winton rarely received direct news about the children. His mother, Barbara, occasionally corresponded with foster families to ensure the children's safety during the war years. Her letters were short and practical requests for updates, offers of small financial help, and notes of gratitude for the family's commitment. When the war ended in 1945, Winton left the Royal Air Force with the rank of flight lieutenant. He returned to civilian life and resumed his work as a stockbroker. His transition from military to civilian employment was quiet and without ceremony. In 1948, he married Greet Jostrup, a Danish Red Cross worker he met after the war. They settled in Maidenhead, Berkshire, and had 3 children, Nick, Barbara, and Robin. Their home life was modest and private. Winton focused on his financial career and on charity work related to care for the elderly and disabled. He joined the Abbeyfield Society in the 1950s, an organization that provided housing for senior citizens. He continued to avoid discussion of the Kindertransport. Even his wife was unaware of the details of what he had done in 1939. The files containing photographs, visas, and lists of names remained packed away in their leather briefcase in their attic. Public interest in pre-war refugee operations faded during the 1950s and 1960s. Britain's collective memory of the war centered on military service, rationing, and reconstruction. Few spoke about civilian rescue efforts, and almost no one remembered the Czechoslovak transports. During these decades, Winton maintained his reputation as a quiet, responsible professional. He worked as a director for several companies, including finance and charity organizations. He received no awards or public recognition for his humanitarian work. No newspaper articles mentioned his pre-war activities. From 1939 until the late 1980s, the details of the Prague Kindertransport were known only to him and, indirectly, to his mother, who had died in 1978. The records remained untouched for nearly half a century, preserved by chance rather than intention. The silence surrounding his rescue work was not deliberate secrecy but habit. Winton regarded it as a task completed, not a legacy. When later asked why he had never told anyone, he replied, "Why talk about something that's over and done with? It seemed normal at the time." Others were doing similar work. For nearly 50 years, Nicholas Winton lived an ordinary life. The memory of the children, the trains, and the letters stayed locked away, quietly waiting for rediscovery. In 1988, nearly 50 years after the Kindertransport operation, the story of Nicholas Winton resurfaced by accident. His wife, Grete Winton, was cleaning their home in Maidenhead when she discovered a briefcase in the attic. Inside were documents from 1939, meticulous lists of children, their photographs, letters from parents, visa applications, and correspondence with British sponsors. Each page bore his handwriting. The discovery surprised her. She had known nothing about his involvement in the rescue of Jewish children from Czechoslovakia. The documents were organized and dated, with notes on every child's journey and family background. Some pages were stamped with official seals from Prague, London, and Dutch transit authorities. Among the materials were copies of telegrams sent between Winton and his Prague colleague, Trevor Chadwick. Grete read through the files and realized their historical value. She contacted historians and journalists to verify the information. One of the first to respond was Elizabeth Maxwell, a Holocaust researcher and wife of publisher Robert Maxwell. She recognized the significance of the records and arranged for them to be shared with the BBC. In February 1988, producers from the BBC television programme That's Life invited Nicholas Winton to a studio recording. The show, presented by Esther Ranson, was known for highlighting unusual and inspiring human interest stories. Winton believed he was attending a small interview about wartime refugee work. During the broadcast, Ranson described an unknown British man who had rescued hundreds of Czechoslovak children from the Nazis in 1939. She read excerpts from letters written by the parents, displayed some of the children's photographs, and then turned to the studio audience. She asked, "Is there anyone in the audience who owes their life to this man?" Around Winton, several dozen people stood up. One by one, nearly the entire audience rose to their feet. They were the children from those trains, now adults, parents, and grandparents. Many were seeing Winton for the first time since 1939. He sat silent, his expression bewildered, his eyes wet. The moment became one of the most iconic scenes in modern British television history. Following the broadcast, newspapers across Britain and Europe reported on the rediscovery. The Daily Telegraph and the Times published detailed articles. The Czech and Slovak press also covered the story, calling him the British Schindler. Survivors of the Prague Kindertransport began to contact him, sending letters of gratitude and sharing stories of their lives. Historians confirmed the scale and accuracy of the operation through the documents preserved in his briefcase. A total of 669 children had been successfully evacuated from Czechoslovakia between March and August 1939. Each had a corresponding file in his records. The documents also revealed the names of the 250 children scheduled for the 9th train that was cancelled after Germany's invasion of Poland. The rediscovery led to renewed interest in the broader Kindertransport network. Winton's operation was unique because it was organized privately, without government sponsorship, and focused specifically on Czechoslovak refugees. The BBC episode also inspired new historical research in Prague, where archivists found supporting evidence in municipal and diplomatic records. In the years that followed, the rescued children, by then middle-aged or elderly, began referring to themselves as Winton-esque children. They organized reunions in Britain, Israel, the United States, and the Czech Republic. Many became prominent in academic, medical, and artistic professions. Some publicly credited Winton with their survival and the existence of their families. Winton received thousands of letters after the program aired. Many expressed gratitude not only for saving lives, but for restoring faith in human decency during one of history's darkest periods. He replied to most of them personally, writing in his small, neat handwriting. After the BBC broadcast, journalists began to visit his home. He declined most requests for long interviews. When asked why he had never spoken about it before, his response remained consistent. "I wasn't looking for recognition. I just didn't talk about it. It seemed normal." The rediscovery of his work, half a century after it happened, transformed Nicholas Winton from an anonymous, retired stockbroker into an international symbol of quiet humanitarian courage. The files his wife found in the attic became archival materials, later displayed in museums and exhibitions in both London and Prague. By the end of 1988, the story of the 669 rescued children had re-entered public consciousness. What had begun as forgotten paperwork in a briefcase became part of world history, documented proof that, in the face of indifference and cruelty, one man's persistence had made the difference between life and death for hundreds. After the 1988 BBC broadcast, international recognition for Nicholas Winton grew rapidly. Within months, newspapers, historians, and television networks across Europe and North America published accounts of his pre-war rescue work. Survivors of the Prague Kindertransport began organizing reunions and public tributes. The story became a subject of academic research, exhibitions, and documentaries. In 1989, Winton visited Prague for the first time since 1939. He met with Czechoslovak government officials, Jewish community representatives, and several of the now-grown children he had rescued. Many of them had built successful lives abroad, in Britain, Canada, the United States, and Israel. For most, it was their first opportunity to thank him directly. The Czech government formally acknowledged his role in saving 669 children. In 1991, President Václav Havel awarded him the Order of Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, one of the country's highest honors. He was also made an honorary citizen of Prague. These ceremonies marked the first state-level recognition of his humanitarian work. In the United Kingdom, honors followed gradually. In 2003, Queen Elizabeth II knighted him for services to humanity in saving Jewish children from Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia. From that point, he became Sir Nicholas Winton. He accepted the recognition modestly, stating in interviews that the real credit belonged to those who assisted him in Prague, particularly Doreen Warrener, Trevor Chadwick and Beatrice Wellington, and to the British families who accepted refugee children into their homes. Despite his fame, Winton continued to live quietly in Maidenhead. He answered letters personally and attended reunions when invited. Journalists described him as practical, punctual, and unpretentious. He never used his fame for political purposes or financial gain. In 2002, Yad Vashem, Israel's official Holocaust memorial authority, honored him as one of the righteous among the nations. The title is reserved for non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. Winton was reluctant to attend the ceremony, saying, "I did not risk anything. I only filled the gaps the government left open." His story inspired multiple books and documentaries. The most widely known include Nicholas Winton, The Power of Good 2002, directed by Matej Minak, which won an International Emmy Award, and Nicky's Family 2011, a Czech-Slovak documentary that chronicled the long-term impact of his actions. Both films incorporated archival footage, BBC excerpts, and interviews with survivors. In 2014, a bronze statue of Winton was unveiled at Prague's main railway station, Praha hlavní nadroky. It depicts him standing with a young girl and boy, a suitcase at their feet, looking toward departing trains. An identical statue was installed at Liverpool Street Station in London. These monuments commemorate both the children and the man whose name they carried across borders. Winton continued to travel into his later years. In 2009, at the age of 100, he met Queen Elizabeth II at Buckingham Palace for a private tea. In 2014, the Czech government awarded him the Order of the White Lion, the nation's highest civilian decoration. The ceremony took place at Prague Castle, where President Miloš Zeman personally placed the medal on his chest. He lived to see the 75th anniversary of the Kindertransport. At that time, more than 6,000 descendants of the rescued children were estimated to be alive worldwide. Many attended commemorative events, referring to themselves as the Winton generation. Nicholas Winton died on July 1, 2015, at the age of 106. His death occurred exactly 76 years after the departure of the last Kindertransport train from Prague. Tributes came from governments, survivors, and international media. British Prime Minister David Cameron described him as a man who shamed us all into being better human beings. Czech and Israeli officials called him a symbol of moral courage and humanity. Winton's papers, the original lists, letters, and photographs, are now held in archives in London and Prague. They serve as historical documentation of one of the largest private rescue efforts before the outbreak of the Second World War. By the time of his death, Nicholas Winton had received more than 40 official honours from different countries, yet he continued to describe his work in the same simple terms. There is nothing extraordinary about it. I just saw what needed to be done and did it. His legacy endures through educational programs, museums, and memorials dedicated to the Kindertransport. Each train, each list, each child's name remains preserved as evidence that a single act of determination can alter the course of hundreds of lives, even when the world appears indifferent. The rediscovery of his papers transformed one man's forgotten files into one of the most enduring examples of moral responsibility in modern history. His life stands as documented proof that bureaucracy, when guided by compassion, can become a tool for salvation rather than delay. The first Kindertransport train from Prague departed on March 14, 1939. It was early morning, before sunrise. The platform at Wilson Station was crowded and silent. The city was tense. German troops were already moving toward the Czech border. The air smelled of coal smoke, damp wool, and fear. Parents clung to their children, whispering instructions that neither side would remember. Each child wore a tag around their neck, name, number, and the word England. Suitcases were small, a few clothes, a photograph, sometimes a piece of bread or a doll. The train consisted of several passenger carriages, reserved entirely for children. Winton's volunteers checked names against typed lists. Every document had to match perfectly. Spelling errors meant rejection at the border. Czech police inspected exit visas. German officials checked passports at the crossing. When the train began to move, mothers ran alongside the windows until the platform disappeared. Many would never see their children again. The journey lasted nearly 48 hours. The first route passed through Dresden, Hanover, and the German-Dutch border at Bentheim. The Nazi police boarded at intervals. They carried pistols and checked lists in silence. Some children were questioned about their religion. The older ones, instructed by the volunteers, replied in short rehearsed German sentences. In the Netherlands, the trains were met by local Quakers and Red Cross workers. The atmosphere changed abruptly. The uniforms disappeared, and volunteers handed out milk and fruit. Dutch customs officials stamped the transit papers without delay. The children were loaded onto ferries at the Hook of Holland, their faces pale from exhaustion and sea air. The crossing to Horwich took about 12 hours. The North Sea in spring was rough and cold. Several children were seasick, and blankets were scarce. But on deck, they saw the English coastline for the first time. low, grey, and quiet. At Horwich, British officials examined the paperwork and medical certificates. Members of the Refugee Children's movement received the groups and loaded them onto special trains bound for Liverpool Street Station in London. The carriages were lined with simple wooden benches and packed with luggage. At Liverpool Street, volunteers and host families waited on the platform, holding cardboard signs with children's names. Translators guided the arrivals. Some children were collected immediately. Others stayed in temporary shelters until sponsors arrived. Between March and August 1939, 8 such trains reached Britain. Each transport carried between 50 and 100 children. The average age was 11. Most were Jewish. A few were children of anti-Nazi intellectuals and socialists. In Prague, the procedure repeated almost weekly. Trevor Chadwick managed the departures after Winton returned to London. He bribed railway clerks, negotiated with Gestapo officers, and escorted the children through checkpoints. His calm and fluent German often prevented arrests. The most difficult part was obtaining transit visas through Germany. After March 15, 1939, when Czechoslovakia was fully occupied, the Gestapo office in Prague controlled all departures. Each child needed an official Nazi exit stamp. Chadwick and his associates filed lists marked children's evacuation for settlement in Britain. The Germans approved them because the parents paid the fares and because the regime saw the deportations as convenient. Each departure was a race against time. Telegraph lines were monitored and paperwork delayed intentionally. Yet the trains moved. By late summer, the pressure grew unbearable. The last confirmed departure took place on August 2, 1939. The next train, scheduled for September 1st, never left the station. 250 children had tickets and visas, their luggage already loaded. But at dawn, news arrived that Germany had invaded Poland. The German authorities sealed the borders. Police ordered everyone off the platform. The children were sent home. None survived the war. The documents for that 9th transport remained in Winton's files, complete, stamped, but unused. The 8 completed trains carried a total of 669 children to Britain. Their names appear on Winton's typed lists, now preserved in archives in London and Prague. Every entry includes date of birth, nationality, and assigned British sponsor. The survival rate of these children was nearly 100%. Winton's system functioned like a private humanitarian network operating within hostile territory. It relied on precise paperwork, personal persuasion, and quiet cooperation between individuals in 4 countries. The success of each train depended on hours of negotiation and the courage of local helpers who risked arrest. The Kindertransport from Prague ended only hours before Europe fell into war. When the Kindertransport children arrived in Britain in 1939, they entered a country preparing for war. Within weeks of their arrival, gas masks were distributed to every citizen, blackout curtains were hung over windows, and posters appeared on walls with the words "Keep calm and carry on." For the 669 children rescued from Czechoslovakia, this was not safety in the way they had imagined. It was survival under new rules. Each child had been matched with a sponsor family, but living conditions varied widely. Some families treated the children as their own. Others saw them as servants or burdens. In towns like Birmingham and Leeds, Jewish organizations helped place them in communities where kosher food and Sabbath observance were possible. In rural England, many were the only foreign children for miles around. They learned English quickly, out of necessity. Words like ration book and sir became part of their daily vocabulary. The government required every refugee to register with the police and carry identification papers at all times. The kinder were not permitted to work, but attended local schools. Teachers often had little understanding of their trauma. When the sirens wailed during air raid drills, some children froze, thinking the Germans had followed them. Letters from home arrived sporadically during the first months of the war. Most parents wrote about ordinary things, the weather, the garden, a recent illness, as if normality might protect their children from fear. But by 1940, the letters stopped. The German occupation authorities banned all private correspondence from Jews. For many of the children, silence became their only news. During the Blitz between 1940 and 1941, many of the Kindertransport children were evacuated once again, this time from London and other cities to the countryside. They travelled by train, carrying small suitcases and gas masks, repeating a journey that felt painfully familiar. Some were taken in by kind farmers and teachers. Others slept in barns and village halls. They helped harvest crops, fed chickens, and learned to milk cows. For those who had escaped urban ghettos, the English countryside became both refuge and exile. Religious practice was difficult to maintain. Some older boys formed makeshift minyanim Jewish prayer groups in hostels. Girls wrote Hebrew letters in secret notebooks. British rationing made traditional Jewish cooking nearly impossible, and children who had kept kosher before the war adapted quietly to local food. The sound of church bells on Sunday mornings replaced the synagogue melodies they remembered from Prague and Brno. Despite isolation, some children thrived. They excelled in school, won scholarships, and built lifelong friendships. Many absorbed English habits completely: politeness, understatement, and tea at 4 o'clock. For others, the loss of language and culture was painful. They dreamt in Czech but spoke only English when awake. By 1943, many of the older boys and girls turned 17, the maximum age allowed for military enlistment. Dozens joined the British Armed Forces. Some enlisted under anglicised names to avoid discrimination. They served as pilots, radio operators, and interpreters. A few were recruited by the Czechoslovak government in exile in London to assist Allied intelligence. At war's end in 1945, they were young adults. They had British accents and British papers, but no families to return to. When the Red Cross published lists of survivors from Nazi camps, most of the names they searched for were missing. Auschwitz, Theresienstadt, Treblinka. These became the invisible graves of their parents. Many of the Kindertransport children chose to stay in Britain permanently. They pursued careers as teachers, doctors, engineers, and artists. Some married British citizens. Others emigrated to the United States, Canada, or newly founded Israel. A few travelled to Prague after the war to look for relatives. Most found only ruins and silence. Nicholas Winton followed these events from afar. He received occasional letters from foster families, thanking him for arranging the transports. He replied briefly, noting that he was glad the children were safe. He kept their letters, too, adding them to the files he had once used for visa lists. The 669 children he rescued were only a fraction of the 10,000 who entered Britain through the wider Kindertransport network, but their experiences reflected the same story: uprooting, survival, adaptation, and permanent loss. Each lived a separate life, but together they formed an unspoken testament to the fragile window of time between diplomacy and catastrophe. Nicholas Winton's story stands as one of the most complete examples of what one person can accomplish when conscience overrules hesitation. Between December 1938 and August 1939, he and a small network of volunteers rescued 669 children from Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia. The operation was conducted entirely through civilian effort, without government mandate, funding, or authority. Its tools were typewriters, telegrams, and conviction. When the war began, the world forgot the rescue. For half a century, Winton never mentioned it. He raised a family, worked in finance, and lived the quiet life of an ordinary Englishman. His papers, the lists, letters, and photographs, remained in his attic until 1988. Their rediscovery reconnected hundreds of lives to the man who had given them a chance to exist. The facts are now indisputable. 8 trains left Prague. 669 children reached safety. 250 more were stopped by the outbreak of war and perished in the Holocaust. The records remain complete, precise, and verifiable. Each typed line corresponds to a human life saved. Recognition came late. The Czech Republic and Britain honored him with their highest orders. He was knighted in 2003 and awarded the Order of the White Lion in 2014. Yet, until his death in 2015, the age of 106, Winton insisted that he had done nothing extraordinary. He said, "If something is not impossible, there must be a way to do it." His legacy is not sentimental heroism, but disciplined humanity, the understanding that moral acts require paperwork, persistence, and the refusal to wait for permission. His story demonstrates that bureaucracy, when guided by compassion, can become a force of salvation rather than oppression. The Kindertransport from Prague remains one of the few successful large-scale civilian rescues of the pre-war period. It preserved a generation that would otherwise have vanished. Many of those children, and their descendants, went on to shape post-war science, politics, and culture across the world. Today, statues of Nicholas Winton stand at Liverpool Street Station in London and Progress Hlavní Nadroky, one where the trains departed, and one where they arrived. Each sculpture shows him beside the children and a suitcase, the symbols of his quiet defiance. Thousands pass these monuments daily, often without stopping. But history remains in motion through those who remember. The essence of his life can be summarized not by medals or ceremonies, but by the continuation of the lives he saved. In a century defined by cruelty and indifference, his work proved that a single individual, using nothing more than order, empathy, and courage, could confront the machinery of destruction and win. Nicholas Winton did not change the course of the war, but he changed the course of 669 lives. That is enough to define greatness.